sisters. We will now start by presenting our first excellent speaker of the third day of this blessed conference and tribute to Professor Badri, rahimullah. Today's topics will be to review Professor Badri's books together with some of the leading scholars within the field of IP. If you have any questions to our speakers, dear excellent participants, brothers and sisters, feel free to write them in the Zoom chat. Write to the Q&A. There is a person called Q&A in the Zoom. Please write your question to Q&A. Our excellent volunteers and colleagues will inform you in the chat how you will do that. So please go ahead and we will address all of your questions at the Q&A section in the last part of the seminar today. So first out to give a speech today is Professor Abdur Rasjid Skinner. Professor Abdur Rasjid Skinner is a consultant clinical psychologist. He pursued his double honors in anthropology and psychology from the University of Durham and has a MSc in abnormal psychology from QUB. He is a chartered clinical psychologist and Jungian analyst. He is also Associate Fellow of the British Psychological Society. He has worked with others over many years developing the clinical application of Islamic understanding of the self. He is a lecturer at the Cambridge Muslim College and a visiting lecturer on the clinical psychology course at the University of Sheffield and University of Karachi, Pakistan. He now works with Ihsan, a Bradford-based clinic that offers Islamically based psychological therapies in the UK. He is an author of several Islamic psychology books. And dear Professor Rasjid Skinner, you're also my teacher because I'm one of your students at Cambridge Muslim College. So I'm very honored to meet you in this occasion as well. It's such an honor to have you as our teacher and Murabbi. And for all of you participants who haven't listened to Professor Skinner, he is one of the great scholars in contemporary era in Islamic psychology. And we're really looking forward to listen about your reflection, Professor Skinner, when it comes to the book, The Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists with Professor Badri. So without any further ado, the floor is yours. An honor to have you with us, Ustad. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. You probably know that I'm not at all confident with the new technology, and normally I have somebody with me to press buttons. So I'm doing this by myself. Can you see me all right? Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Right, so thank you, Vegas. So I don't need to press any more buttons. Well, first of all, let me say how delighted I am to be on the same platform as Baker Fiono and others here. And these are people that have, I don't know, Hanan Dover is here and Rani Awadi. Are they on this presentation as well?
Yes, Professor, they are with us today as well.
Alhamdulillah, because all these people are people that have enriched me, and they're people I would not have known were it not for Malik Badri. And it sort of reminds me how we've all been blessed, not just by the things that Malik Badri taught and the writings that he left behind, but by his excellence of character and his generosity and his compassion, his encouragement, his kindness. And a fruit of that is that he's brought so many of us together that otherwise we wouldn't have known each other, we would have been isolated. So alhamdulillah for that. And I suppose my feeling is that there was something saintly to Malik Badri, and he imparted a barakat to the movement that we're still enjoying. So alhamdulillah for that. And one product of that is, of course, this conference. I'd also like to thank the Iamp for giving me the privilege of being on this platform and being able to say just a few words about Malik Badri's seminal publication from 1979, The Dilemma of the Muslim Psychologist. And as many of you know, the basis of this was a paper that Malik wrote in Arabic called The Muslim Psychologist in the Lizard's Hole, alluding to the well-known hadith, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that the time would come, Muslims would follow those before them, even into the lizard's hole. And he delivered this first, I gather, I think 1975 at a conference in the United States. And I'm told that, Malik had discussed his ideas with people, and it was Professor Anis at Ripar University and others that more or less locked Malik in his hotel bedroom until he'd completed his paper. So, we're very thankful for those that did that in 1975. He then presented his paper in, I think to his department in Saudi Arabia, and met with a very hostile and rowdy response. These were Arab psychologists, mostly with PhDs from America, and they weren't at all happy to hear what Malik was saying. In fact, I think one shouted out, well, how can you have an Islamic psychology? Can you have a kafir chemistry then? So this was the Muslim world in which Malik first presented his ideas. Now, later, he published it in English as The Dilemma of the Muslim Psychologist. And this book made an absolutely decisive impact on my own thinking. From the late 1970s, after I'd qualified, I was slowly, with the help of friends, trying to find an approach to psychology that fitted with my beliefs and my experiences as a Muslim, but only as something for my own purposes. I hadn't formed even the idea of an Islamic psychology. I just needed something that I could use in clinical practice to make sense of what I was seeing. And I'd searched for writings about Islam and psychology, and really had been disappointed. Now, I would say for younger viewers, this was a time well before the internet, when you did a literature search by going through a library and looking through a card index. And it was also a time when a lot of good material wasn't published in mainline journals. They were in conference proceedings and conference proceedings and things like that. So I may well have missed something, and my apologies to anybody that I did miss. But what I had found was really disappointing. It was trying to squeeze Islamic concepts into a Western psychological framework. Typically was saying, well, when Freud refers to the id, he's referring to the nafs amara or something like that, or the superegos of Lamia. And this didn't fit with what I needed at all. And then I was in a bookshop near the London Central Mosque. And I remember this clearly. This would have been mid-80s, I suppose. The owner, an Egyptian called Samir, shouted out, "You've got to read this." And he handed me the copy of Malik Bedri's The Dilemma of the Muslim Psychologist. And I don't think he even charged me for it, just gave it to me. So it was so important I read it. And it really was. It was that book which changed my whole way of thinking. It was different from anything else I'd read about Islam and psychology up to that point. And basically, it first of all critiques Western psychology from an Islamic paradigm. And that was the decisive difference from anything else I read. Malik was standing firmly on Islam, and from that orientation was able to make sense, filter, what was coming in from Western psychology, not trying to fit Islamic concepts into a Western paradigm. It pointed out the fundamental ethnocentricity of Western psychology. And therefore, that is, it has been constructed within a Western cultural context. Its theories, when they have been tested on Western populations, normally American undergraduates. And therefore, there was a danger of applying uncritically anywhere outside of the West. In fact, I would say it's more specific than that. I'll say anywhere outside Manhattan and Northwest London. Applying any of these theories without considering, are they culturally relevant? Do they actually fit the local population? And then it persuasively demonstrated that Western theories in psychology are often completely inimical to Islam, and this is particularly applies to psychoanalysis. And not just Islam, actually, I think from any monotheistic culture. It's easy to think of Western psychology as being a Western colonization of the mind, which indeed it is. But the West, the monotheistic culture in the West itself has been colonized by the Western psychology, most of it at least, that developed from the late 19th century onwards, whether it's the people had an agenda, and the agenda was to replace religious thinking with something which they considered to be more rational. And it is these theories, particularly psychoanalysis, which Malik pointed out had most dangerously seduced Muslims into the lizard's hole. The book also very clearly distinguishes those Western psychological theories that, when stripped of their cultural context, or taken out of their cultural bezel, the bezel is the surrounding of the ring, contain a jewel that Muslim psychologists could use. And he indicates those traditions in Western psychology, that of Jung, Gordon Allport, of the behavioralists, the humanistic school, which with caution Muslims can study and make use of. He trashes the idea of psychology as an objective science. And he analyzes this particular paradigm of most of Western psychology, which was fundamentally, a rationalist tradition and anti-religion, any religion. It alludes to those traditional Islamic scholars, such as Al-Ghazali and Ibn Sina, which had something to say about psychology and which were worth exploring. And it points also to the need not to erase psychology from an Islamic syllabus of studies, because at the time this was happening, those that realized how toxic Western psychology could be, how it was really colonizing the mind, were arguing that psychology should be sort of deleted from the syllabi in Islamic universities. And Malik resisted that. What he said was, we need to develop the psychology from an Islamic paradigm, because that is hugely valuable for the Ummah, not just in the clinical field, but also in social psychology. So all these key points were made in a very small book. And this is one of its virtues. This is a book that's accessible because of this talk. I realized actually is that the dilemma is like an egg. It contains within it everything that's necessary for future growth. So a seed that contains the DNA points I've mentioned are issues that ever since many others have been developing. It set the agenda for how we have been working ever since that point. So this was hugely a seminal publication. And just one final comment I'd like to make, that the book is written in a clear, elegant, lucid English. And this is how Malik spoke. I used to love just listening to Malik speaking English because he spoke so beautifully in a way that has been lost amongst current English speakers. And not just his vocabulary, the fineness of his sort of use of vocabulary, but in his syntax, the grammar, everything was clear, lucid, and you don't hear English spoken like that any longer. It was like listening to the BBC from the 1930s. And I said to Malik once, how do you speak such beautiful English? And he said, well, I went to school in the 1930s, 1940s in the Sudan. My teachers were Englishmen that had been educated in the Edwardian period before the First World War. So they spoke an English that has deteriorated since that time, and Malik preserved it. He was the last person I knew to speak such a good English. And this is another virtue of the book. If the ideas are great, they should be able to express simply and lucidly so that almost everybody can understand them, because you feel in your heart this is right. And this is one of the beauties of the book. It's absolutely profound in what it's saying. It's perspicacious. It's absolutely accurate. Malik is seeing something in the world of psychology of the time which other people were missing. And he's able to express that insight in a simple, lucid, easy to understand way in a book that's small, easy to read, and also I think beautifully illustrated. And this is added to its impact. So we all have a great gratitude to Malik Bedri as individuals in this field. And I think the whole Ummah has an enormous debt to Malik Bedri. And I think all of us here are wonderfully grateful for knowing Malik and being inspired for him. Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much.
Professor Rasjid Skinner, mashallah, thank you for a thorough and excellent presentation. Please, dear excellent participants, round